Well, as you guys might know, or for those of us who do not know, Pastor James / Dad is on vacation right now. So I'm filling in for him for today. And he asked me what kind of situation I'm going through or what kind of topic I'd like to preach over. And I was talking to him about priorities. Lack of time is actually lack of priorities. And that's at the time what I was experiencing, and I was getting back on track with that. So he was saying, okay, well, if it's about priorities, then what about Proverbs 3, 5, and 6? And I'm like, all right, let's go ahead and do it. So that's my life verse, by the way. That's a very big fan of that verse. If everybody can turn to Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and verses 6. I'll start reading right now, starting at verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. Everybody, let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you for giving me this opportunity to be used by you to speak to other people so other people can hear you through a different means. And also thank you for giving me the chance to really study thoroughly what this passage means so that I understand it more myself. Please use me how you need me to communicate to others what they need to hear today, and help each of us to understand you a little more. In the Lord's name I pray, amen. So we're going to start this off by talking about the person who wrote this proverb. His name was King Solomon. King Solomon wrote this proverb, and he wrote a good amount of the Proverbs in the book Proverbs. And this one was probably, though it's near at the beginning, he probably wrote it close to the end of his writings. And as we've learned in previous sermons, Solomon's focus when he was king was not on God for a good amount at that time, especially near the end of his reign as king. His focus was not on God. He allowed other things to draw his attention, and he had tons of things that he could do as a king, because virtually as a king, what he wanted, in a way, to an extent, he could get it. So he allowed a lot of things to distract him. He had hundreds of wives. He also had other things as a king, such as food that he could be distracted with. He could have clothes, status. All of those things he could allow himself to be distracted by. And what happened when his focus was on these things? Well, his path was changed, and it was changed by his own doing. He stopped walking down the path of righteousness. He stopped focusing on God. He stopped dying to his physical self each day, and sin began to fester inside of him. And because of that, he began to distance himself more and more from Jesus, whether it was intentionally distancing himself away or unconsciously. Solomon at this time was lost. He was constantly looking for the next thrill of the moment with no focus on what the future might hold, no consequences of what that thrill would be. He couldn't stop. He was out of control, just rushing into anything and everything that felt good, constantly searching for that next hit of dopamine. Solomon had a lack of priorities. Actually, really, he just had a lack of one priority, and he realized his focus was not on Jesus Christ. And we ourselves have also been there before. We've been in those shoes where we're looking for our next hit of dopamine. We have this idea of feeling fulfilled when we have this goal we want to reach and working our way towards that goal, working our way from point A to point B. And the only thing about that is once we finally reach point B, that idea of fulfillment or happiness that you would imagine yourself getting once you finally reach that destination, it's not as much as we expect it to be. We don't feel as good when we finally accomplish that goal. We don't feel as happy. And so we begin to think, Okay, that wasn't that good. I just need to find another point B to reach. And then when I get there, I'll be happy. So we find another point B, and then we reach it, and the same thing happens. And we continue making new point Bs to reach. And so on, the cycle continues. And we continue to allow that to distract us. We lose focus of our true purpose, which is to serve Jesus through everything that we do. The more focused we are on the world, the farther away we are from Jesus. And later in life, Solomon recognized this. He realized that this is what was happening. He was focused on worldly things, and he was far away from Jesus because he wasn't focused on Jesus. So Solomon wrote this proverb of acknowledging God in all your ways to tell other people that this is how it works. This is how you do God's work. This is how you find your purpose in everything that you do. So the point of today's sermon is the best path in life is to make Jesus your number one priority. So let's go over the first verse 5. We'll go over the first half of it real quick. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. So we, as followers of Christ, need to trust in the Lord, the only true God, the one that is in control of everything, the one that orchestrates everything together to exalt him more. We need to trust the one that is in control of each of our lives and everything that we do. And that's who we trust, and we trust with all of our heart, with our entire being. We need to be confident in God that he's going to be able to do everything that he's supposed to do using us. And we're confident that whatever we do is going to work towards him. We also need to be completely dependent on God, that we cannot do this by ourselves, that he needs to be the one in control, not us. So we need to depend on his control. It must be real, it must be sincere, and all of our trust should be towards him, and none should be other worldly things, such as riches, people, idols, talents. None of those things we should have our trust in. We are to be confident that God is controlling everything, and we must depend on him for guidance in everything as well. So let's look at verse 5 again, that second half. And lean not on your own understanding. That word lean is also turning towards. So we are not to turn towards our own understanding. We're supposed to turn away from ourselves. We're supposed to turn away from our own insights or our own good judgment. We are supposed to turn away from our knowledge and our wisdom we've acquired through personal experience. We should not depend on these things to guide us through a godly life. And it might sometimes help to use your judgment for some situations, but if you are not leaning and turning towards God's truth to support your judgment, then it's wrong. Another thing we should turn not away from but turn towards is we should turn towards others for help. Those around you who are continually learning how to be more like Christ will help you do the same. They will help keep you from straying off the path of godliness. And if you do fall off that path, those Christians can help you get back on it. These are your friends. They're your chosen family. They care about you and they want to help you. These Christian friends. And we must recognize that we cannot do this by ourselves. We cannot lone wolf a Christian life. And I'll give you an example of what this could be like. If you are standing on a chair, this was an illustration that one of my previous youth pastors gave, and I've remembered it ever since. If you are standing on a chair and a non-Christian friend is standing on the ground, and you're trying to pull that non-Christian friend up onto the chair, I lost my page. Not my page, my spot. If you're trying to pull that non-Christian friend onto the chair, then it's going to be a lot more likely, or it's going to be really hard to pull them up onto the chair, and they're going to be much more likely to pull you down from the chair, because they're not going to be willingly stepping onto the chair with you. They're going to be struggling against you. And if you have, say, instead 5 or 6 people, Christians, on that chair, number one, that's a pretty awesome chair. And second, all those people, it's going to be much more likely to pull that non-Christian up onto the chair as well. You need friends to support you, to help bring others to Christ, because that non-Christian it's going to be harder for them to pull other people down from that chair as well. You cannot walk this path on your own. You must turn towards other Christians for help and for support. And that's something that I struggle with a lot, mostly just because my lack of communication skills. I actually got a text from Dad this week he mentioned to me saying like, hey, you haven't been texting me back as much. Like, we got to fix that. And I'm like, man, okay. I hated reading that text, though I know it's true. So it didn't hurt my feelings as much as it just hurt my ego a little bit. Because I do that with everybody, and we were talking about that in youth today, about texting people back, and that's a prayer request for me. But we cannot do this on our own. We need to have that connection, those connections with other Christians to help us grow and to make sure that when we do fall off the path, that they can help us bring us back onto the path. Another thing that we should turn away from is from man-centered understanding, from human-centered understanding. The people who you turn towards for help should be focusing on God, on Jesus, rather than worldly things. It is not themselves that they are focusing on. They are focusing on God. It is not themselves. Yourself and the ungodly people you turn to have a bias that every idea discussed is filtered through. And based off of their lifestyle and their experience, they hold strong personal opinions over certain things. And they are not, because they're not Christians, godly opinions. They are not godly opinions because they don't have this godly basis for everything that they do, because they're not focusing on Jesus with their lifestyle. Rather, if their focus is on Jesus and on Jesus' understanding and not their own, they are depending on someone else who understands all things perfectly with pure truth. There's no opinion. It is simply right or wrong, true or false. There's no in-between with Jesus. There's also no gray. It's just pure black and pure white. And when you turn towards Jesus' understanding, you begin to see everything with much more contrast. The blacks and whites begin to stand out more clearly, and you begin to see less gray. So let's look at verse 6. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. So at the beginning of this, it says, in all your ways. So this is something personal for you. Completely investing yourself in Christ in everything you do. Every action you take each day should be with the intention of exalting God in some way. For example, if you drink your coffee in the morning, your intention might be to be more awake and not super grumpy or cranky. So when you go to talk to other people, other non-Christians that day, they can see that you're in a happy place. You're setting a good example for Jesus that way. And for most of us, it'd be coffee. For me, it would be tea. But that's the point. Each of us have different things that we do. The action will be different, but the intention should be the same. That is, exalting God. And this is where it gets unique, because each person's path is unique. You will experience different situations, you'll meet different people, have different interests, and because of these, you will all acquire different strengths. You're better at certain things than other people, and vice versa. Your possible life could be directed towards Jesus using those strengths that you have developed. If you choose to be willing to obey God, he will use those strengths to his advantage to exalt him more. And where it says acknowledge here, the key to spiritual knowledge is your willingness to obey. By being willing to do what he has called you to do, you will gain more and more understanding of who Jesus truly is. So if you're willing to obey Jesus, then what's the next step? If you've changed on the inside, and now you must show people you've changed by publicly pointing towards him. And to do that, you just make people around you aware that you have changed by your lifestyle and by the words you say, and by telling them that you do want to help somehow. You want to take action because of this new change in you. Make it clear, for example, if you're in a church and you want to help more, make it clear to the leaders around you that you do want to be more involved. The leaders are always excited to see someone grow. And the leaders, that's what they're called to do, is to help grow other Christians as well, and to help lead you in the right direction. Your leaders can help you be more involved. They simply need to be aware that you want to be more involved. So from this, if you're thinking, there is no way that I can reverse what I've done, there's no way I can be used by Jesus because of my bad reputation, everybody's going to look down on me because of that, and because of my past as well. Here's an illustration of how God's path turned someone's life around completely. And the illustration that we're using is Paul's life. Paul believed that Christians were wrong. He was so passionate about his beliefs. He was a zealous Pharisee, which means that he took it extremely seriously. He was very active in his beliefs as well. And he was so serious about his beliefs that he killed Christians because he thought they deserved to die. So he was a murderer. And then one day he was blinded by a flash of light. And that was the start of his conversion. That light was Jesus' light. He heard Jesus speak, and he realized that Jesus was the real deal. He realized that Jesus was the Messiah, and Jesus was serious about what he preached. And Paul changed his focus from his previous beliefs towards Jesus. And God had a path for Paul, and he used Paul's great enthusiasm and great energy in pursuit of godliness. Paul's center became God, and God began directly controlling Paul's path. He built churches, he traveled, he was a missionary. He wrote letters of instruction that we all use a lot of the time in the New Testament, and he also led others to Christ. Now, at the beginning, it wasn't that easy for Paul to publicly say that he was a Christian, not because of his pride, but because when he did, nobody believed him. Because everybody knew Paul as this zealous Pharisee of one who killed Christians. So when they heard him saying that he is now a Christian, nobody believed him at first. But over time, they began to realize that he was being serious about how he's following Jesus now because of his actions and because of his words that he said. People could tell that he had changed on the inside. Paul's life was completely turned around because he changed his focus towards Jesus. Now, these instructions that we're talking about, this will give you a directed, God-centered path. It won't be the easiest path, but it will be the best path that you can take because God is in control of that path. Your path will be directly controlled by God based off of your willingness to obey Him. He can use you to do amazing things, just like He did with Paul, just like we did with thousands of other people. And I want to end this with a quote from a missionary named C.T. Studd, or Charles Thomas Studd. He was a missionary. Only one life will soon be past. Only what is done for Christ will last. So as Jason can come up to play his very beautiful stringed guitar, from what we've been talking about, if you have realized that your focus has not been on Jesus, then you can just talk to God about it. You can tell God that your focus has not been on him. You can apologize. He will forgive you, and he will help guide you throughout the rest of your life as you continue to bring your focus more and more towards him. So if everybody can stand up. And while Jason is playing, if you feel the need to come down to the altar and pray, you can do that. Praying on your knees, it makes a world of difference versus standing up or sitting down versus praying on your knees. So you can talk to God about how you want your focus to be on him more. You can talk about how you want to give God more control over who you talk to, over what actions you do.